Okay, I think we're started, and right now I actually have everybody muted, but I have the setting where you guys can unmute yourselves. So please go ahead. I was saying earlier that I figured out that was the problem with the audio before. I didn't have everyone muted, and if we get interference from the volume, it overrides the recording. So here we are. For the second and final presentation on health policy advocacy as it relates to rural hospital closure crisis. And before I get started, I just want to say thank you again. I'm going to admit one more person here. I want to say thank you again. I honestly know, and we feel it now as well, just exactly how busy everyone is and how valuable your time is as rural nurse leaders. I realize that it's almost impossible to even get a second away, much less a full hour with your daily demands. And especially, I'm not sure how many of you are feeling the COVID crisis, but it hit our world this week, and it's kind of rocked our world this week. I actually had thoughts of canceling this and just recording it and sending it out to you or trying to reschedule, but I'm not sure it's going to get any better in the weeks to come. So I figure I might as well just get it done and get it over with and move forward, because it doesn't look like there is, a big end in sight. So and I just want to address again that I know not everybody is passionate about policy. And even if you do have an interest, I realize that a lot of you don't feel like you have the proper education to feel confident in it. And there's no way I can do that in 2 1-hour sessions, get that information that you need. But I hope that I can give you a base that will provide you the knowledge to get a start and move forward, and that you'll feel empowered to become involved on some level. I said this before, but education promotes involvement, and involvement promotes change. My first introduction to policy was from my mentor, and that actually had nothing to do with health policy on this scale. It had to do with internal policy. So even if you start there, that's a great place to start. And I will say, because she's on the call today, but she was strict about, if we were going to write policies, we better know where it came from and where the information was and how to back it up, and know what the federal reg and the state regulations were. And I learned so much through that. So that started my policy basis. And so I just want to stress that you can start anywhere. Just start somewhere and get going. So that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to get going. This project obviously consists of a pre-survey on healthcare policy advocacy, which you've already completed. We have 2 educational sessions, this being the second and final, that as we talked about. And then I'm going to send you a post-survey identical to the one you completed initially, and I'll be sending that out probably the first part of next week. So be watching for that, and if you'll complete it and get it back to me, I can wrap this up and move forward with my manuscript. That's my final step, my manuscript, getting that turned in and then defending it before the committee. During the first session, we covered rural hospital closures and how that fit into the project. I showed you results of the survey that you completed, and then using evidence-based research, we jumped right into health policy advocacy communication. We started initially with showing you the evidence that it is our responsibility to be involved. And I think everybody agreed by the time that first presentation was over that it is our responsibility. We're responsible to speak up and make change. So I just can't stress enough, even on basic levels, I want you to feel empowered to speak up about advocacy issues. During this session, we will review some of the basics of government, and so that sets the groundwork for your advocacy work. It may be very basic to some of you, but again, I'm not sure that all of us nurses even remember the basics of government. I sure didn't before I got involved several years ago with policy. We will look at how a policy becomes law. I will actually go into one specific policy that became law and how that happened. I'll take you out to the website to review all of that so you guys can track and follow different things. I'm going to provide some resources. As a matter of fact, I'll cover them in the presentation, but I also sent you a full page of resources, and I'll kind of go through that here so that you know what those resources are. And then last, as I mentioned last time, I'm going to give you a letter template that you can use and tweak to your likings for your situations if you're reaching out. You saw the slide in the first session, and we talked very high level about the who, what, when, where, why, how of healthcare policy. When we addressed the who, I gave you this link to find your representatives. In this session, I want to drill down a bit more and get pretty granular on how that all works. I feel like the more information I can provide you, the less you really have to look up or dig for, and maybe the more apt you will be to act on it. Remember from that first session that I mentioned that our attention span is actually 2.8 seconds. That's pretty sad, isn't it? 2.8 seconds. I know personally I have good intentions to go back and do something or look something up or act on it, but the fewer steps I have to take to get there, the better my chances are of completing that task. So let's take a deeper dive into who your policy leaders are. It's probably been years since you thought of the basics of government and how this all works, but it really is important to understand the basics. And I want to stress the basics because I don't want you to feel like you have to know the ins and outs of policy or be really political to get involved. So the basics are important, though, in your quest for advocacy, and part of that is education. For those government buffs out there, if you're really involved, this is going to be a little bit elementary for you. But again, I think I can say for most nurses, and I feel comfortable saying most nurses because I was in that group myself, we really haven't been interested in healthcare policy. Most nurses don't even remember the basics of government because we really had no need to be involved in the workings of government and policy, or so we thought. I mean, our quest was just to take care of my patient. Let me take care of my patient and leave that part out. So hang with me just for a few minutes while we review some of the very basic principles and procedures of this. So there are three branches to government. The judicial branch has the Supreme Court and other federal courts. The executive branch has the president, the vice president, and the cabinet. And then we have the legislative branch, which is what I'm going to talk about mainly today, and that has Congress. Congress has actually two different pieces to that. It has the House of Representatives, and then it has the Senate. And whether you're talking about a federal level or a state level, legislation is very, very similar. So keep that in mind. It can get a little bit confusing there. The presidential office is currently held by Donald Trump. I think everybody in the world knows that. And I'm not just saying the United States, the world. And he can be very controversial. I'm not going to go there today. My goal is to be partisan, although I certainly have my own opinions. But my goal is to educate you so that you not only have your opinions, but you can feel confident to act on those in the form of advocacy. The president holds the highest, let me admit one more person, sorry, it comes in at the top of my slide a little bit and it distracts me. The president holds the highest office in the federal government. In each state, we have 2 senators assigned at the federal level, and they serve 6-year terms. Their service area is not segregated, so I won't be showing you a map on them. We're going to look at some maps here in a minute, but we won't see a map on the U.S. senators. They serve the entire state on a federal level. For Texas, ours are John Cornyn and Ted Cruz. So those are your 2 senators, no matter where you are in the state. Senator Cornyn has been in office since 2002, and he's our senior senator, sorry to say senior citizen, senior senator, and he will be up for re-election this year. So for those of you who are tracking that, please know who his replacement is and educate yourself and, be ready to vote. Our junior senator is Ted Cruz, and he's been in office since 2013. He's not up for re-election until 2024. The House of Representatives is a little bit different. There's 435 members for the whole United States, and that number was set in stone by the Permanent Appropriation Act of 1929. And oddly enough, that act was a result of the battle between rural and urban areas in the United States following the 1920 census. That rural-urban battle is still going on, and actually is much of what my project is about right now. My project actually is about the inequities between the rural and urban healthcare access. So it's been going on forever. Texas has 36 districts, and each district has a House representative. I have noted on the maps that we'll look at next, so that I put the maps on so that I can show you by district who your representative is, and I've also put that in one of the handouts that I sent out to you. So for the people on the call today, I looked up each one, where you're from, or actually that were in the whole DNP project. Not all of those people are on the call today, but for the whole project, we have people in Congressman Thornberry's group, which is, he's soon to change. That actually is in progress of change right now. Arrington or Hurd's group districts. So here are the districts. This map breaks up the districts. You can see the 36 districts in Texas, and this is the federal House of Representatives. Texas is a red state, a Republican conservative state, and you can see there's a few blue districts pretty much down in the very south, but overall there's very few Democratic U.S. House of Representatives in Texas. I'll show you a little bit more. I said we're going to get granular. So District 13, which is up in the very northern part, and you can see it slides over across even the Wichita Falls area there, but it actually is Mac Thornberry's district. And for those of you who are in Amarillo, Childress, Dumas, Hereford, Perryton, Quanah, or Wellington, and Wellington, if anybody from Wellington's on here, I actually made a mistake in the resource I sent out to you, but I'd already sent it. So you might want to correct that because I had that district wrong on that sheet. So just an FYI. But that's our district right there. So the next one is Jody Arrington's district, 19. And if you are in Brownfield, Crosbyton, Dimmitt, Lubbock, Plainview, Tahoka, or Tulia, your representative would be Jody Arrington. And then our last one, we have someone from Monahans, and that is Will Hurd. So you can kind of know, at least by looking at those districts, who you would need to address if you are active. So here's where things get a little bit confusing because, again, like I said, there's U.S. or federal senators and House of Representatives, and then there's our state senators and state members or House members. So typically the U.S. or federal senators and representatives work on our behalf on federal matters. And of course, those at the state level work on more locally state-controlled issues. So whether it's a federal or a U.S. senator, they are usually referred to as senator in their name, Senator so-and-so. That's a little bit different if you're speaking about the House of Representatives. Those at the federal level are usually referred to as Congressman so-and-so. And then if they're at the state level, it's Representative so-and-so. And not that that matters a whole lot, but if you're addressing those members, you really do want to address them with the proper terms and titles. So I just included that. Just a little bit more about the House and the Senate. Historically, the Senate has been known as the upper house and a little more aristocratic, so to speak. The House of Representatives is more known, number one, as the lower house, but they're also they more directly represent the people, and they're more accountable to the people. So think about that just for a minute. Do you see your senators or your House members more in your districts doing town hall meetings and that kind of thing? I would dare to guess, and I would actually just say, it's your House members that are out and about more. Your senators usually are not as accessible to you. And so in your advocacy efforts, you're probably going to be a little more successful in reaching the House members, and you're probably going to be able to build relationships better with your congressmen and representatives than you are your senators, just for what that's worth. Our state governor is Governor Abbott. And again, he holds the highest office in state government as opposed to federal. Here's the slides I was talking about that we would get to, that I show you your districts. Again, it's just a visual to help you sort out. And this one's at the state level. So for those of us in District 31, or actually not us, I'm not in 31, but for those of you in District 31, your senator is Kel Seliger. And that is Amarillo, Dimmitt, Dumas, Hereford, Perryton, Tulia, or Wellington. And again, these districts are split a little different than other districts. So the Senate and the House have all different districts. And sometimes they switch all that up too. So they switch the district boundaries up. So that's a little confusing. And that's why I wanted to include this information. And then our other district that we have members here on, and I just included those are the ones I wanted to target, but is District 28, and that's Charles Perry, who holds that seat. And he presides over Brownfield, Childress, Crosbyton, Lockney, Lubbock, Monahans, Plainview, Quanah, and Tahoka. So you can see it's kind of crazy how they split those district lines up, but that is how it is right now. And actually, we do see Senator Perry not very often, but quite often in our district. And I try very hard to make those meetings. I want him to have facial recognition. If I send him a letter, I don't want it to just pop in as something that he would never recognize. So again, it's important to build those relationships so that, you know, they have some familiarity with who's talking to them, who's sending them requests. And then finally, this is I think the last map I put in, but this one is the state house districts. And again, you can see they're all different again. But again, for our districts, of those of us on the call, District 68 is Drew Springer, and he represents Childress, Crosbyton, Lockney, Quanah, and Wellington. So if you're in those towns, that would be your representative. District 81 is Brooks Landgraf, and that's Monahans. District 83 is Dustin Burrows, Brownfield, Lubbock, and Tahoka. You're in this district. 86 is John Smithy. And you can see here that actually Amarillo is split here. So some of Amarillo is under John Smithy, and then some is under Fort Price, and I'll open that one up here in just a minute. But Hereford, your district is 86. I think Hereford's on the call maybe. District 87 is Fort Price, and that's the other parts of Amarillo, and Dumas lies in this district as well. And then finally on the call we have people from District 88, and that's Perryton, Plainview, and Toya, and your representative is Ken King. So again, know that those districts change up, and you just kind of have to stay on top of it. So now that you know your policy leaders, think of them as your advocacy team members. You've got to have a team. We've all got to have a team to make things happen. I couldn't work without my team, and when things get a little rocky among my team, it makes it really hard to move forward. So think of them as your team. Get to know them as your team. They are who you need to succeed, and they need you to succeed. They need our input. But think about how we act as a team and interact. You kind of have to dedicate that same, I don't say on the same level, but that same dedication to developing your team with your congressional leaders if you want to be effective. And that takes dedication, practice, and above all, communication. We have to communicate our needs, our wants, and those of our patients to the ones who can help us succeed in better healthcare outcomes as well as access to care, which is what I'm most passionate about, is access for the rural people. It's about a relationship. Develop those relationships. I can't stress that enough. Not only did I use the maps as a visual, but I also, and this slide represents a little bit of that. I put together each town with your U.S. and state senators, your U.S. and state House of Representatives, along with your districts. And I tried to put that by town, by county, so that you could go down quickly and not have to, really go through all those maps. I listed the websites with live links, so you could go straight to those if you needed to. And so hopefully that will help you some. You can save that document or print it out, or use it however you need to. A few more governmental tidbits that I want to give you to make your advocacy efforts successful. We're currently in the 116th Congress, and you will hear that referred to all the time as whatever number of Congress we're in. We're in session 2. They're 2 years long each session. And they always start on January the 3rd. Session 2 of the 116th Congress started on January the 3rd this year, and it will run through January of 2021. So again, it always starts on the 3rd. Texas is a little bit different though. Our leadership is not always in session, and it's not even in session yearly. We are one of only 4 states that meet biennial. So our legislative session starts on the 2nd Tuesday in January on odd years only. And we can only be in active session for 140 days max. The governor can call as many special sessions as he wants if something comes up, but our regular session is 140 days. And again, I've included this information only because it's important for you to be successful in your communications with your policy leaders, that you know when it is best to contact them, when they're in session, when they're out. And one other thing of interest, and I'll get to that in a little bit, but if any of you are interested in policy fellowships, which I can't push hard enough if you have an interest to learn more policy. It's important if you're doing your fellowship in session or out of session. You're going to learn no matter which time you're in a fellowship. If you get what you put into it. But I think for those of us who chase those fellowships, we really want to get something out of it. But again, it'll make a big difference if you're doing a fellowship when things are in session. You'll see a lot more. You'll be involved in a lot more. So basically, you could sum up Congress's work or their job by stating that they are responsible for making and approving the laws that govern our nation and state. And we need to be a part of that. Healthcare workers need to be active in healthcare policy. Rural nurse leaders must be active in healthcare in advocacy efforts to preserve healthcare access to the rural people. So while it sounds simple to put Congress's work in one sentence, it's anything but simple. It's a very complicated process. It's often very slow and frustrating to think that, how long it takes to get a bill through to pass into law. But to put it in perspective, I'm going to show you a few numbers here. In the 115th legislative section, approximately 10,000 bills were introduced. So in a 2-year period, 10,000 bills were introduced. Only 443 of those were signed into law. So that gives you a little bit of perspective. Of those, 1,500 of them were healthcare bills that were introduced, and only 124 of those were signed into law. So that equates to about a 4.5% of all bills that are introduced actually make it into law, and about twice that when looking at healthcare, maybe about 8% it jumps up to, that are passed into law. But overall, that means that close to 95% of all the bills introduced die. They die. But some of them make it to a committee, and they're read once in committee, and then they sit there and die, or some of them never even get pushed out to a committee. And I'm going to talk more about that process so you understand that. And that's exactly where we're going to go next. And this slide takes just a minute to load. I'm hoping it'll load right. But I chose this 10-minute video explanation to describe how the two branches of policy leadership work and how a bill moves through into a law. The video represents or solidifies some of the same things I've already talked about, but it goes into much more detail about their committees and how they move through committees and which committees are most important. So again, keep in mind here that this is a federal representation, but whether it's at state or federal level, these actually are very similar processes. So I'm going to see if we can get this video going. Hopefully it'll load. It took just a minute.
In other videos, we have first started talking about the legislative branch of the United States federal government. We talk about how it has two houses. The Senate, that has 100 members, 2 per state, 2 times 50, and the House of Representatives that has 435 members. And states have a certain number of representatives depending on their population. What we're going to go into a little bit more depth in this video is exactly how laws get passed. In particular, how do bills get passed by one or both of these houses. And if you're looking at the US Capitol building from the lawn, you could assume that the Washington Monument is behind you in this picture right over here. The Senate chamber is on the left side, just like that, and the House of Representatives is on the right side. But what does a bill actually look like? So right over here is the cover of a House bill. And notice some interesting things. The House bills start with HR House of Representatives 1. And so this is the first bill being introduced in this first session of the 108th Congress. And it says, and it's a little hard to read, especially if you're looking at this on a mobile phone, but it says to amend Title 18 of the Social Security Act to provide for a voluntary program for prescription drug coverage under the Medicare program, to modernize the Medicare program, and for other purposes. So that's just a very quick summary. And then it talks about who are the representatives that are introducing the bill. So it's Mr. Hastert, and then it's in parentheses, it says for himself, and then it says Mr. DeLay, Mr. Blunt, and it keeps going on and on and on. And this was introduced June 25th, 2003. And over here at the bottom of where it talks about who is introducing this bill, it says, which was referred jointly to the Committee on Energy and Commerce and Ways and Means, in each case for consideration of such provisions as fall within the jurisdiction of the committee concerned. So this is the first clue of how bills get started. In theory, anyone could write a bill. In practice, they are written by a member of Congress's aides or aides of a committee, and we're going to talk more about committees, but they need to be formally introduced by members of Congress. And you can see here, Mr. Hastert, Congressman Hastert is listed first. But it doesn't go straight to a vote by the full House of Representatives. It will be introduced to an appropriate committee, which is a subset of the House of Representatives. In this case, it's going to go to both the Committee on Energy and Commerce and the Ways and Means Committee. We can similarly look at a Senate bill, and it has some similarities. And the key thing to appreciate is that a bill could be introduced into the House initially or into the Senate initially. And sometimes you have parallel bills that are essentially trying to do the same thing, going through both chambers at the same time. But right over here, this is a Senate Bill 1833. This is in the 115th Congress, to modify the requirements applicable to locatable minerals on public domain land and for other purposes. And then this is September 19th, 2017, and it says, Mr. Udall, for himself, and then it lists other senators, introduced the following bill, which was read twice and referred to the Committee on Energy and Natural Resources. And then you start seeing the text of the bill. So once again, whether it initially gets introduced into the Senate or into the House, the first place where it goes is to the appropriate committee. And in general, it will only get voted on by the entire Senate or the entire House if it is approved by a committee, if a majority of the committee actually votes for it. Now, what are these committees? So in the House of Representatives, you currently have over 20 committees at the time that I'm making this video. Right now, you have 20 standing committees, which means they are continuously in operation, and one select committee, which means it might be created for a special purpose, although some of these select committees tend to last for a while. Now, what I'm going to list here are some of the most powerful committees in the House of Representatives. You have the House Ways and Means Committee. Now, why is this important? What is a Ways and Means? This is a committee that first considers legislation around taxation. So it's the ways and means by which the government can actually fund itself. So you can imagine this is very, very powerful. Who gets taxed? By how much? How much revenue is actually coming in? What will that do to the economy? And this is a committee that's very specific to the House of Representatives. In general, bills could be introduced to the Senate or the House or both. But if it's something regarding taxation, that has to originate in the House of Representatives, and it will go through the House Ways and Means Committee. Another very powerful committee is the Budget Committee. Through tax policy, the House Ways and Means Committee influences how the government gets its revenue. But the Budget Committee decides what is actually the budget of the government. The president can make a proposed budget, but it's the Budget Committee that actually decides on what budget Congress will actually vote on in the House. Now, once you have a budget, you have to think about how you're going to spend that money. And that's what the Appropriations Committee is focused on. Which programs get how much funding? So once again, this is a very powerful committee to be on. But perhaps the most powerful committee of all is the Rules Committee. The reason why this is so powerful is that in the House of Representatives, even if a bill is introduced into a committee, and even if that committee decides to vote on that bill, and let's say they pass it by a simple majority, it doesn't go straight to the floor of the House of Representatives to a vote. The Rules Committee is actually, you view them as the traffic cop for the House of Representatives. For the most part, they decide which bills go to the floor of the House. What are the rules by which they're voted on? Are people allowed to make amendments, which are add-ons to that bill? Are people allowed to debate it? They can even decide whether it's going to be voted on by the House of Representatives acting as a House of Representatives, or whether it's going to be voted on as the committee of the whole, so to speak, which is the entire House of Representatives. The difference between voting for something as a House of Representatives or the committee of the whole, in either case it would happen in the same room, is that there's different procedures on how to do it. And so you can imagine there's a lot of strategy depending on which party is in charge on what initially even gets through a committee. And then once it gets through a committee, what's the procedure by which it is voted on, or whether it gets voted on at all? Does it have a very public debate, or is there a very little debate? Now, if something does pass the House, then that same bill, once it passes the House, would have to be voted on by the Senate. Now, similarly, in the Senate, when a bill is introduced, it goes to a committee. And in the Senate, currently, there's 16 standing committees and over 20 total committees at the time of this video. And just to get a sense of some of the more powerful committees on the Senate, you have things like the Appropriations Committee, which is a sister committee of the House Appropriations Committee that we talked about before. Once again, they will try to think about, well, how could that money be spent? You have the Foreign Relations Committee. One key distinction between the Senate and the House, there's a lot of areas where they both might legislate on or introduce legislation on. But in general, tax bills can only originate in the House, while the Senate is closer to things like foreign relations. The Senate Foreign Relations Committee, all treaties would go through that. The Senate Armed Services Committee, it has legislative authority over the military. Now, once something gets through any of these committees, then it would go through the Senate floor. And even there, you start to appreciate the difference between the House and the Senate. In the Senate, not only do you have a few number of senators, they tend to be more generalists, and it's easier for something to get to the Senate floor. It's a little bit more collegial. In the House, if the majority party is strongly controlling the Rules Committee, they can very strongly control not just what gets to the floor, but what is debated, how it's debated, if it's debated, and what has amendments put on. And also, the members who serve on these committees is a little bit more specialized. Now, in either case, once a bill gets through either house, it has to be voted on by the other house. So if a bill gets approved by the Senate, then it will go to the House. And if that same bill is approved by the House with a simple majority, then it will go to the president. Now, the president might sign the bill, in which case it would become a law, or the president could veto that bill. if the president vetoes the bill, it goes back to both of these houses. And to override the veto, each of these houses, they both have to vote with a 2/3 majority. And that happens very seldom. Now, you also have a scenario where sometimes very similar bills are going through both houses at the same time. So there's a situation where a similar bill has gone through both houses at the same time. What it goes to is something called a conference committee. And a conference committee is a group of both senators and representatives who will get together and they'll try to reconcile the differences between those two bills. Unless they get one bill that reconciles the differences between those two, then it'll go back for vote to both houses. And if they pass both houses, then once again it will go to the president, who could decide to sign it or veto it. And once again, if it gets vetoed, that veto could get overridden. So the big picture here is we've talked about that policy making process in previous videos, where at first you want to identify an issue, and then you want to do policy formulation. Well, a lot of that is going on in the US Congress. You have congressional aides who are identifying problems, maybe different constituents, maybe lobbyists are saying, hey, can you fix this, or can you change the tax code in some way? And then they formulate a policy, which is essentially these bills. These bills are essentially a policy formulation, and then those policies have to be adopted. To be adopted, it has to be approved by both houses of Congress and then signed by the president, or if it's vetoed by the president, that veto has to be overridden by both houses of Congress. And then it's up to the executive branch to implement that policy. I'll leave you there, and in future videos, we'll talk more about the mechanics of the US Congress.
Okay, so I think that was a lot of information, and hopefully it wasn't a little too basic. But again, I just think it's important for us to understand the basics of how all that works for us in advocacy efforts. So I've also included a visual, and this visual right here, of how a bill becomes law, so that, you know, if you just want to look at the process, some people learn different ways. So I tried to accommodate a little bit of that. And I think it's interesting too, to see just the visual. Again, I want you to notice that whether it's state or federal, it's the same process. There are a few basic exceptions in state and federal. And number one, at the federal level, a bill can be introduced at any point. At the state level, House and senators can only introduce a bill in the first 60 days of regular session. I shouldn't say they only can, but there's some, they have to jump through hoops after that. After 60 days, the introduction of any bill other than a local bill, maybe at a county level or a smaller level, or something that's introduced as an emergency declaration in a disaster. So for example, right now, it requires the consent of at least 4/5 of the members present and voting in the House, or 4/5 of the members in the Senate. So those are one thing. The other is basically that the governor signs into law as opposed to the president. I think that's pretty well known on that one. Again, I know this is very basic, so hang with me. This was another slide that you saw in the first session, and after learning more about your representatives and what part they play in the bill or a policy becoming law, this becomes even more important. So I chose to include it again and just take a brief mention at it so we can look at it again. But I'm going back to that relationship. It's imperative not only to know about your senators and representatives when you're advocating advocating to them on matters, but know your audience, know your senators, familiarize yourself with who you're talking to, know their stance, know their committees. Which committees are they on? Are they on a committee that could significantly advance your cause, or are they on a committee that could stop your cause? You need to know those things a little bit. You don't have to know every bit of that, but it's some information I wanted to touch on. So let's take a look at an actual bill or policy and how it progressed through Congress. How many of you out there have heard of the CARES Act? This one is something we've talked a lot about recently. So even if you're not familiar with what it is, probably you've heard of it. It's actually a bill that was introduced as a response to COVID-19 for the sole purpose of keeping workers paid and employed, offering healthcare system enhancements, and providing economic stabilization. So it was introduced into the House on 1/24/19. Notice that date of introduction. Had we even heard of COVID at that point? I'm not sure about that. And I'll leave that alone because I don't understand that part, but it was introduced at that point. And notice that it was introduced in the House. Think back to the video just now and think about maybe why was that introduced in the House. This has to do with money, taxation, employment. It had to be introduced in the House. This bill could not go through the Senate first. It had to be introduced into the House. But with that said, it passed the House on 7/17/19. It passed the Senate on 3/25, and notice how quickly it got signed into law. By 3/27, the president had signed this into law, but we were well into the COVID crisis by 3/27/20. We weren't here. We just felt it, but the world was. And so actually the president had 10 days to act on it, or it would have automatically become law anyway. So, but he did sign it the same day it was put on his desk. So I want to jump out to this website and show you a bit more on how you can look at these bills or policies and know that how they're moving through or not, and just track them a little bit. I'm going to stop sharing for a minute, and I had a little bit of issue with this before, so hang with me. I think we'll get there. Okay, are you guys seeing that?
Yes.
Okay, perfect, perfect. That's what I want you to see. So this is the CARES Act, and I had already had this pulled up, but that web link in the video will take you straight there. We have about 20 minutes left, so I want to make sure that I can finish and show you some of this information as well. But if you were to go to try to track a bill, you would come here, and actually you can see that it actually has become law right here. This little gray tracking system here shows you that it is already passed into law. This one shows who sponsored it. Can y'all see my mouse? Okay, this shows who sponsored it. This shows the committee it went through, and again, it had to go through Ways and Means because of the kind of bill it was. This was the last action. It became law. This tells you the law number, and this tells you how long it took or how many processes it took to get there. But you can get so much more granular if you want to look through here. You can see the summary. If I click on this tab, it's going to tell us pretty much an overview of the whole bill. You could read through all of that, and there's no way we have time, nor do I want to, but you could. The text of this bill actually is not even on here yet because I've looked several times. But once the bill is transcribed into the law as it will stand, and that has to go through the GPO, the Publishing Office of the Government, it will actually be uploaded right here, and it's not yet. But this will tell you how many actions it went through to get there, other titles of the bill, and I'll just click on a few for time's sakes. But I really want you to see this website. I use this website a lot when I'm tracking different things. You can see how many different names that bill had. So if you were looking for any of those names, you'd be able to search it and find it. You can see if it had amendments, and it looks like it did, who sponsored it. This actually who sponsored the bill. This is who co-sponsored the bill. If you wanted to know if your congressman or senator or representative sponsored this, you can scroll down and see exactly who did. You can put them in alphabetical order. You can sort them over here. There's a lot to this website. It's very deep. You can see which committees, and again, we've already looked at that, but it was the Ways and Means. And then you can see that there were 48 other related bills. This was the one that passed, and I'm going to guess that probably most of those died in Congress before they got through, but there probably was a few of them that got passed. Another thing that you could do, you can search the whole site. Let's say we want to look just for rural health care. Anything that's on the agenda for rural health care. My internet is a little bit slow here, so I hope it'll stay up. You can see here that there's actually 980 that have to do with rural health care, and you can see where they are. This one was introduced. It was introduced on the last action was 3/13. But you can see it's set there. It really has had no action. Sometimes I just scroll down quickly and look at that because I can see if anything, and none of those have even moved out of an introduction. You can see because I just look for the gray box. But the other thing I want to show you, without getting too far off, you can actually look over here to this side. And if you only want to look at the 116th Congress, or you want to look at last Congress, you could go through that and look at all of those bills. I can look here, down here, and see, just open this one for example. I could look here and see every single one of them that became law, or every single one of them that the president vetoed. What's sitting on the president's desk right now or has gone to the president. So this site is incredibly deep and versatile. I gave you this website, and it's in the PowerPoint, and I think I put it in your resource page, because this is where you'll go a lot if you're trying to research a bill to see where it's at. I'm going to try to get back into my PowerPoint now. Give me a minute. This was what I practiced the most because I faltered every time on this. So bear with me if we get lost. I'm going to have to go back down to where we were and open the PowerPoint back up. Oh, my PowerPoint's having a difficult time loading. Not that one. There we go. Let me try this one. Yeah, I'm getting a message popping up that says my internet's unstable. Okay, now do you guys have that back on your screen? Perfect. I think we're back where we needed to be. So, so I'm going to move on. So let's transition back for the last 15 minutes or so to the advocacy part. I just think it's so important that you get the basics. And so I spent that time on that, but I want to spend some time on the education. I feel you must understand basics. Again, remember I said basics. But I don't want you to think that advocacy is so political that it drives you away. That's what most nurses hate about policy. If you talk about policy or politics, they're like, oh no, I'm not into that. I got into nursing to take care of patients. So I would rather present this view of advocacy to you. Who all recognizes her? And not that you have to speak up right now, but if you recognize her, just note it in your mind or send me a chat. This might help you. Anybody notice this little lamp? And of course, and I see where a couple of people chatted in. Yes, this is Miss Florence Nightingale, and we all know her. She's our hero. Florence is remembered for her transformative work as a military nurse in the Crimean War. And she had vast contributions to healthcare. I mean, we could go on and on all day about her, but that's a whole nother subject. She was not only the world's first nurse researcher and leader, but she was the world's first nurse policy advocate. She spearheaded changes that led to astounding improvements in healthcare and the lives of people across the globe. I got tongue-tied. She was an advocate, and that is advocacy at its finest. That's what advocacy is all about. That's the part of advocacy I get excited about, and I want you to be excited about. I want you to share my passion. So in the first session, you saw this slide too, and when I put it up, I asked you to tell me the first 3 words that came to mind. I'm going to do a little bit of a different poll this time. So when I open up the poll, I want you to tell me the first 3 words that come to mind when I ask you what you feel are your top, most reliable resources, meaning what would help you the most in your healthcare advocacy efforts. And let me see if I can get my poll open. I'm going to give you about 30 minutes to answer that poll. And then I'm going to ask you to open up your mics and let's talk just a little bit about that. We're kind of getting close to the end, but I'm getting close to the end of the PowerPoint as well. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll, and I'm going to share those results. So it looks like our top was shadowing a policy expert, and there were no right and wrong answers, just so you know. Every single thing on this list would probably be very beneficial, but I just wanted to see what you guys thought, and that's great. That's interesting. Fellowships, mentor, toolbox, shadowing a policy expert. And just so, well, I'm going to stop sharing that. And then I'm going to go to this next slide because I want you to talk to me a little bit about why those of you chose that, if you're willing to, why you chose what you chose. Anybody want to open their mics? And if not, we'll move on. I understand. I think I've got you where you can open your mic. Okay. And if not, we'll just move on. I mean, that's fine too. And I'll show you what the research shows. But so as we dive deeper into this advocacy thing on rural healthcare, the research shows that there are 2 overwhelming components getting people involved. Number 1 is education on how and what to do. Number 2 is education on what the issues are or how to stay in the know, so to speak. So education on both of those was the critical component, and that's what I've tried to do on both of my presentations with you. That education can be as simple as you initiating a self-learning activity or as complex as enrolling in an official policy course. I noted also in the literature that nurses as a whole, we learn by doing. And that's why I suggest a couple of the things I suggest, and we're going to move into in the next slide. But fellowships, having a mentor, shadowing a policy expert, those things where you actually do, you participate, you have hands-on learning, those are the things that seem to be more beneficial for nurses. So let's look at a couple of those things. How many of you have ever been introduced to a fellowship? Has anyone in our group participated in a fellowship of any kind? A policy fellowship, that's kind of where I'm going with it, a policy, but any kind. And then has anyone in our group participated in a leadership or fellowship group? And again, not that you have to answer those out loud, those are questions to stimulate some thought. But I want you to think about them, and here are some keywords that you might search in looking for those fellowships. I've also included a resource for you. I looked up a lot of fellowships for you. I'm looking for fellowships all the time. So, but I put some of those resources for you in case any of you want to check into them or chase some of them. They open and close their applications at different times. They have different requirements. So this is just a list of a few, and you can look at that in your packet as well. Even if you can't get into a fellowship though, for whatever reason, ask someone you know and trust and who's fluent in healthcare policy to be your mentor. Find a coach, get connected. Most anybody that's passionate about this or really any subject that they're passionate about, they want to teach you. They want you to learn. They want you to become involved. So I want to spend just a little bit of time on fellowships because I don't think that most people really understand fellowships, or some people have never even heard of them. And because healthcare is so intimidating, or healthcare policy is so intimidating, I think that fellowships provide you an incredible introduction to learning opportunities in a protected and guided atmosphere. You feel like you're okay to act in these atmospheres because you have someone with you. You're not out on your own. Fellowships partner you with a mentor, and they provide intense and interactive education. They involve a collaborative team, usually a project that you're working on with real deliverables and real deadlines. And those deadlines press in when you start working in your fellowships. So be prepared for that if you're going to chase one. They're typically a year long, some of them 2. I actually saw one that was 3. That might be a little bit too much for me personally. You have virtual meetings, but you also meet several times a year face-to-face. Pre-COVID you did anyway. I'm not sure how they're going to handle all that this year, because you work in learning collaboratives. You're usually paired with other fellows and you're given an assignment or a policy project. The fellowship most often accumulates in a project being presented at an event, like an annual conference, a board meeting. The NRHA policy fellowship that I was in ended in a presentation to the NRHA Congress at the Policy Institute, and that was most of them do something along those lines. They usually involve a conference attendance or 2. You usually go on a trip or 2 or several, and that usually involves either the Capitol, if you're doing a state fellowship, or up on the Hill in DC, walking the halls of Congress and the Senate. So you would actually visit both of those, and you would interact with the congressmen and senators on advocacy efforts or subject matters. But again, keep in mind that you're with a mentor. That's what's different about the fellowship. So Torch and NRHA obviously focus on rural issues, but the THA fellowship focused on the state one. I actually got chosen for the state one this year. I've been in Torch and NRHA, and I was supposed to be active in THA's fellowship, but COVID has canceled that. So I'm not sure how we'll move forward with that, but I'm sure they'll let us know. They all require an application, and so you would be required to get recommendations. You're required to have sponsorship of some sort from your employer most of the time. However, keep in mind that some of these fellowships are free. or your employer will agree to cover the cost. I just spent a lot of time on these only because I just feel like this is one of the very best policy learning events in my career. And I would highly recommend anyone interested in chasing any of these to look into some fellowships and see what it might take to get into one, and if you could do it. So the next slide is only a 3-minute video. It's a short video. It's about THA fellows. And before I start that one, I want to tell you a quick story. We're pressing up against time, but when you're looking for these fellowships, if you choose to do so, keep in mind that anything that says leadership, and you can see this one's called a Leadership Fellows Program, and that's what Torch called theirs too. So anything that says leadership probably has to do with policy and not necessarily leadership. My very first fellowship was in Torch, and it was when John Henderson was still here at Childress, and he's actually pushed it out to me. He said, hey, I think you might be interested in this. I looked into it. I said, yeah, I'd love to. I'm all about learning. I'm in a leadership position. Yeah, what does it take to sign up? I signed up. And only after I signed up, and I was in my very first meeting, and this is an honest story because everything I read about it did not talk about policy. After I got into it, I sat through my first meeting and realized this is 100% about policy. I know nothing about policy, and I really don't care to learn anything about policy, but I was committed, and I was a little bit frustrated because I was committed to a year-long fellowship on policy. But I have to, in looking back, I have to tell you that actually was the beginning of my love and my passion for advocacy efforts in healthcare. So let's watch this 3-minute video and then we'll finish up.
The genesis of the Texas Hospital Association's Leadership Fellows Program came as a result of finding that many of our hospital leaders in the state of Texas were not comfortable approaching state legislators or congressmen to advocate for the industry. And so what we've done with the Leadership Fellows Program is to provide those skills and tools and training and actually on-site experience for young leaders in the state of Texas to learn that it's okay to be an advocate for themselves.
What made me apply for the Leadership Fellows Program is an interest in both educating my private sector counterparts on the Department of Veterans Affairs, but in all honesty, learning a lot more about what they do as well.
From a community leader standpoint, it's been impressive to see other CEOs to come in and give their presentations and talk about what their community means to me and look at their passion and see where they're going.
My favorite part of the curriculum so far has been the presentation by John Daly. He was fantastic about teaching us how to communicate better with other people, the way to present yourself. I think that's a huge component of this entire program, is learning how to basically step out of your shell a little bit or your comfort zone and make those connections with people so that we can be better advocates for healthcare in Texas.
The program has helped me grow as a community and facility leader because I realize how much value we need to place on relationships.
The program does a fantastic job of bringing people together from all different parts of the state who necessarily wouldn't have interaction with each other.
A lot of us have the same priorities, whether that be patient safety, whether that be community initiatives, whether that be fundraising for other activities. So it's really important for us to learn how to build teams and collaborations across facilities.
I've reached out to the veterans, I've reached out to Parkland, I reached out to another rural hospital in Wise Regional in Decatur, just developing those relationships. Already I've seen that improvement in just me and some of the things we're doing at the health system.
But I think the main thing that I really liked about this program was understanding the complexity behind how legislation gets passed and how important it is for us to engage with not just our legislators, but also their staff. A lot of times they do not necessarily have the expertise that we do, so we need to enable them in building the solution, not just presenting a problem, and to do it collaboratively.
If I had any advice for someone who's considering applying, it's to get involved, right? I think you get out of anything what you put into it. So if this is an opportunity, realize that it's as much a responsibility as it is an opportunity.
Do it. It's a fantastic program. It's going to help you build those relationships that you need that you didn't even know you needed.
Come to each one of the seminars, each one of the conferences, and start getting to know the different people. And then when we get the CEO roundtable, has been phenomenal.
You're going to learn so many things from other people who have the like mind and have the same goals that you want to achieve.
The opportunity to get a couple hours with some of the brightest minds and some of the biggest successes in the state of Texas from healthcare, it's a privilege. And take advantage of that privilege you've been given.
Okay, we're gonna go through these last slides because I'm a little bit over and I really, really want to be respectful of your time. I do, we know how busy you are. It's getting crazy, but I'll finish up here and then I'll open it. I'm totally good with time, but I know I promised you 1 hour. So again, I mentioned the 2 things that I found in the literature to be most beneficial, and that was, the 2 things that we've covered the most on. But the one thing I covered the most on was, try to help you understand the process and how you get started, how you interact. But the being in the know and knowing what the issues are, I looked and looked and looked. There is not a silver bullet for that. That has to come from within you. You have to seek out some resources to help you stay in the know. You have to sign up to the grassroots advocacy efforts or get involved with those who do know. Sign up for alerts. Get involved with some of your other professional groups. So I really just can't give you one thing that narrows this down like maybe a fellowship would help you learn the key elements. It's important that you get involved and you determine your success in this area. So I can point you in the right direction, and I can tell you that some of those are the groups that we associate with in RHA, and I do need to give a disclaimer here. I'm getting nothing, no financial or personal recognition or benefits from listing these, so I have to let you know that right up front. But they are the best resources I know, so I want to share them. But in our National Rural Health Association is something that I get something almost daily. I get an email from them or from the grassroots advocacy or the groups I'm in. I still interact with my fellowship group. Anything you can interact with that brings you the knowledge on what are the issues, what are the things at stake. Torch is another great one, and it's actually at a state level. Of course, NRHA is federal, Torch is state. If you are members of NRHA or Torch and you can get your username and password, you can get into a lot of the emails and group conversations. But even if you're not members, jump on their websites. They have advocacy pages that will help you learn and be in the know. Always stay interactive with your professional nursing groups. They all have advocacy groups. They have Day at the Capitol that, again, gives you a mentor. You go with a group. You see what those who have been there before do and how they interact with their congressmen and senators. And you learn from that. We learn mostly as nurses by interacting, but stay connected to your professional group associations. That's the best thing I can tell you on that. I've included this, and I'm going to go through these last slides really quickly, but it is a letter template, and I promised you that I would get you this. I would normally not put this much on one slide, but it's just, and I sent you this too in your packet. So the things that I want you to remember, though, is personalize it. And in this particular one they did. You can see that it starts out with their association to a group, and it tells how it affected the local people. We talked about that in the last session. Tune your pitch. Again, know your audience. This letter does tune the pitch to something that the senators and representatives are familiar with. It's talking about the CARES Act and the Payment Protection Program. And then keep it brief. If you were to put this letter into a Word format, and it's split between 2 slides, but it's about 300 words or a 1-pager. That's the best you can hope for. So stay within that. And then last but not least on the letter, remember to tell them what you're asking for. We talked about that in the last session. And this letter not only tells them, but it puts it in a different color and it underlines it. So the ask is very clear. So if somebody's just skimming this letter, they could go straight to that and they would know what the ask is. And that's critical to getting your message across. So in review, we started, we're out of time and I'm going to wrap it up, but in review, in the first session, we covered all of these things on the slide, and I won't read them to you because I've read them to you several times. And then we reviewed the advocacy part of our jobs, that it's not just our job, it's our obligation. And I talked to you about how, or the evidence-based methods of what's important when you're communicating to your policy leaders. In this session, I talked about just the basics of government. I talked about rural health policy. I showed you how to look one up, how to track bills, what the website is. And I talked more about educational efforts and some resources for you. And I left you with a sample letter. So we started with this very slide in the first presentation, and I'm going to end it. It's the last slide here. 128 rural hospitals have closed since 2010. Texas is leading the nation with 24 closures right now, and I think that's increased. I saw a notice just at the front part of the week that another Texas hospital has closed, and I didn't look it up, so I don't want to put that information out there, but I haven't had time to look anything up recently. Our rural people are losing their healthcare access, though, and that's important. That's my whole mission, is to get you on board and aware of that. We have 673 more hospitals that are at risk of closure right now. 179 of those have terminated OB services over the 10 years from 2004 to 14, dropping the percentage of rural OB from 55 to 46. Stephanie, are you on here? I saw at the beginning of the week an article come out from this very author, Katie Cosmantle. She is incredible, but she updated her research from 14 to 18 and added that. Are you on here, Steph?
Yeah, she's on.
Yes, I am. Celine, can
Do
you
you
hear me?
yeah, I can hear you. Did you happen to see that article, and do you know the stats on that? Oh, I think
I did actually see that article, and the hospital-based OB care. Can you hear me?
Mhm.
The percent of rural county hospital-based OB care in 2004 was about 40%, and as of 2018, it's 27%.
Wow. So you can see that we're losing, and to lose OB affects a community in so many other ways, and I really won't go into all that, but yeah, our rural hospitals, only 27% of them have OB services. So that's pretty alarming. I was hoping you had seen that, Steph, because I didn't really get a chance to dig into that. Thanks.
Yes, I did, and it sure.
Yeah. Did you go ahead? There's a little bit of a delay, so I didn't mean to talk over you.
No, it's okay. It's just, as an OB manager in a rural facility, it's just concerning because that care to access to maternity care is just decreasing, and there's just that continued decline. So it's very alarming.
It is very alarming. And all the more reason for all of us to get involved. So the big question is, why is it happening? And you saw this on the first presentation, but it's because healthcare policies are passed without consideration of rural impact. Our voice isn't loud enough. How has that happened? Again, because our voice isn't loud enough. We're not involved enough. So the whole message to my presentation for the last two actually is to get involved. I want to give you, even if it's just the basics, I want to get you started in advocacy. I want you to feel the need to be involved. And I want you to get to a point where you feel comfortable in stepping into that role, even if maybe comfortable is not the right word, but at least some level of comfort that you'll step out and begin to learn more. Because again, education encourages participation, and participation forces change. We have to be the change. So that brings it up, and I'm 10 or 12 minutes over, and I'm so sorry. But in closing, I want to say you do not have to be a policy expert, and you certainly do not have to be political to be effective. You just need the basic knowledge of how the system works, how policy becomes law, who your leaders are, how to interact with them, and what the issues are. That's it. And then you just have to act on that. So I'll be sending this recording out to you the first part of next week, as well as that final survey. So if you guys can just finish that final survey and get it back to me. And I just cannot thank you enough for your participation. I want you to stay safe. I want you to take care of yourself, your staff, your patients, and please become involved in rural healthcare policy advocacy. I'll open it up, and if anybody has any questions or conversations, I'm going to unmute everyone. You may be muted on your end, but you certainly can unmute on your end as well if anybody has anything to add.
Hey, Sue Lynn, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
I think that you brought up a really interesting point when you did your poll. You were talking about one of the last selections in that poll was, would a course in policy be beneficial? And while I selected that as a yes, it's not 100% to get you all the way there. Even through graduate school, I feel like it just brought me to the surface. And then you hit the wall where you say, now what? Now I know a little bit, but the next step, I feel like you owned that well, is taking the next step into a fellowship program and a mentor. And I found so many of my peers through graduate school don't even have local mentors because they work in such larger facilities. And then these rural nursing peers don't have that either because, like you brought up, it's just so foreign and unknown. So I feel like the drive home is the fellowship program sometimes to get us over that gap.
I totally agree, Raina. I could not agree more. Really, that one support is just something that you can't replace just by learning in a classroom. My two mentors that have been just so instrumental in my entire career. But again, I spoke of Deanna earlier because she got me started early with policy and knowing that, you know, you can't just put something out there. You have to know why and what the rules are and what do the regulations say and where is that regulation? Show it to me. And then, of course, I was blessed enough to work under the leadership of John Henderson as well, who actually mentored me into policy. And so I've had the best of both worlds all the way around to get me where I am. But man, a mentor and one-on-one, which is what a fellowship combines all of that into one. But that's why I really wanted to stress fellowship. So I agree, Raina, the education classroom gets you the basics, but it doesn't really get you to a comfort zone. Anybody else? And we'll close out and give you your day back.
Thank you, Sue Lynn. Great presentation.
Thank you, Miss Carolyn.
Y'all be safe.
Yes,
be
we're
safe.
trying. It's the COVID has taken our community over, and man, are we feeling it. It seemed like all in one day. Like, no, not one day, but 1 week. You know, we've kind of marched it along and kept things kind of at bay. And I think it was Kate that said earlier this week, our protective bubble is gone. It's gone.
Well, you're in my prayers.
Well, thank you, thank you, thank you.
All right. See you later.
All righty. Thanks, y'all. Now, do I have to stop recording or does it, no, stop recording?